And the part you've all been waiting for, the grinder autopsy. Mostly we'll just explore the gears in the head of the grinder. This one I think had bad brushes, so it doesn't work anymore. This would make awesome robot parts. These two will be the last videos for 2022. I realize these ones ran really long. For next year, I'll be experimenting with a much shorter format. Okay, grinder autopsy, take one. Actually, you probably feel cheated. I didn't take the whole thing apart in front of you. There's parts of it. Oh, it's got brushes. This is the brushes, kind of like the other brushes from the other one. So this one is a Drill Master 4.5 inch from Harbor Freight. And here's the rest of it. Switch on that side, the body, the winding is inside of here. So the motor itself might work if we pulled it all out of the case. No, it wouldn't, because the brushes mount back here. So kind of like this is exactly the problem of the jigsaw. Without the brushes, it wouldn't work. A test I have not yet done. I'm wondering if one of these would work with DC power instead of AC, because a DC motor also has brushes. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments. I have not experimented. It would be an easy enough thing to hook it up, but I don't want to hook it up to a working grinder and do something stupid if I just don't know what I'm talking about. That happens enough anyway, but I try to only experiment on broken things. Okay, I think I've been inside this one before. Maybe. Yeah, at least with most power tools, they put screws on it so you can get into it. It's like that little toy car. I was so amazed when I started looking at it. Is like every single thing is held on with screws. None of it is snapped together at all the way down into the motor. It's like I took one of the motors apart one time, and it's just like you can get all the way in. It's like, it's crazy. I was like, I'm trying to imagine, unless they actually had robots putting it together. I'm just thinking they got a bunch of kids in a warehouse somewhere putting those things together. You'd have little tiny screws and little tiny fingers, you know. It's like, man, there's no way you could put that together and make a profit. And the thing was $12 a piece or something like that. It was cheap enough. I bought 3 or 4 of them, just for the purpose of taking it apart and stealing the parts from it. That's what's weird. You know, you get something like that. Or like this grinder, for instance. If I could go buy a grinder for cheaper than I can just buy the gearbox, you know, how is that possible? You know, but to buy the gearbox, it's kind of like going to General Motors and buying the carburetor for your car. You know, if you had a car with a carburetor still, it costs you more to buy the individual parts than it does to buy the car assembled, which actually is another side idea. Like when I got the wiper motors off the bus, I was like, man, if I go buy a complete wrecked car and haul it out here and then steal all the parts off of it, I'd have a heyday. You know, I could make that could be my YouTube, that could keep me going on YouTube for years, taking all those parts apart. Okay, yeah, that's why I did this last. It's a crease inside. Okay, so I'm not sure if I can take that out easily. But down inside here is a spiral cut gear. It's not a bevel gear. I'm going to have to look this up later and see what kind of gear this is. I was thinking, I don't think this is a bevel gear. It is spiral cut. So this one goes there, and it's way out on the edge, and it's pretty small. And then compared to the size of this one, oh, I see. This has got I might be able to get it apart if I really wanted to. They got a snap ring on this one, but I'm not sure about the other one. Okay, so this is kind of clever how they do these. The spiral, how do you describe that? If you had like regular gears, they come together, right? And then I'll put up a video, or I'll make something and put it up here. But basically, as the teeth come together, they only have one small contact point, right? out on the tip usually. And then as it gets further in, this one is more engaged and this one is completely let go. So you only really have one tooth in contact, and it's really got good contact for a very short period of time. By doing the spiral, more of the tooth is in contact at the same time. So you can get, you know, a 1/4 of an inch of engagement instead of just the tip. And I guess spiral gears are supposed to be quieter also. They don't have as much of a whine. That little yellow motor, it had a lot of whine. It probably had straight cut gears. Who was this? Somebody was taking apart a really old transmission. Might have been Mr. Pete. Very likely Mr. Pete. He had found an old transmission that was out of a Model A or a Model T or something like that, old Ford. And he was taking it apart and showing the different gears. And I can't remember if that one actually was or not, but he was talking about it. Reverse makes more noise than all of the forward gears, because for whatever reason they put straight cut gears on reverse and spiral cut gears on all the other gears, because you don't use reverse very much, and so they figured they could save a few dollars because it takes a little bit longer to make a spiral cut gear. So for the forward gears, they said, okay, it's worth making it quieter, because every little bit of noise inside the car, you sit there with nothing else to do and you think about how much noise. And if you got in somebody else's car that was quieter, you would buy that car the next time instead of the car you had. So all the manufacturers realized that if they didn't make quieter gears, they wouldn't sell any more cars. But for reverse, they figured nobody would care, because you don't go backwards very much. And so if you next time you're in your car and you're going backwards, notice the difference in sound. It's still like that. They never did spiral cut gears in reverse for whatever reason, apparently. I haven't taken enough transmissions apart to know that, but that's what they say. Anyway, so now that I've looked at this gear is pretty big, the details on the teeth. I could 3D print something that big. I had a hard time printing something smaller than this, but this would work. There's a good chance, well, no, I take that back. I still think that they used a worm drive gear on the windshield wipers, and I talked about that in the other video. And I was wondering if this was going to be a worm drive or a spiral cut or a, which one? The bevel. The bevel is a different one. I'll show you a picture of a bevel gear. This is not a bevel, but I thought it might have been. This can be back driven, and I'll show you what that means if I can get this in the right direction. Probably this way. Okay, so if we turn the motor, it turns. If we turn the gear, it still turns pretty easily. There's no real problem turning backwards, back driving. Okay. This is important because, you know, for instance, if I wanted to be able to push the robot, all I would be doing is spinning the motors. Not a big deal. Okay, that's pretty easy, no big deal at all. If it was the wiper motor, I'll show you the difference here. I got pretty good leverage on here. I cannot turn this. I don't want to break what's inside, and I might probably break this, but this does not turn. This is locked. So the way I was looking at it before, this probably has a worm drive in it because of how slow this thing turns. This has got a ridiculous amount of torque on it, which also probably means it's a worm drive. It could also be a bevel gear, but a bevel gear I could probably back drive, and a worm drive you really just can't. And it's like a hose clamp. You can't pull a hose clamp hard enough to get the screw to start turning. It just won't go. It's got such an angle against it that as you pull, you're just pulling the tooth against the angle. If it was at a slope, you could pull it and it would move. Okay, so I'm probably beating that dead horse, but I just kind of wanted to confirm that in my head after looking inside the grinder. It's not a worm drive, and this one's not a bevel. I thought it might have been. You could see a bevel drive doing kind of the same thing. And I'll show you a picture of a bevel drive. I can't explain it without seeing it better. Okay, so I'm going to put this back together so I don't lose the pieces, because this part works. It's just the motor didn't work. And I think very likely in this case, it was the brushes that wore out. So had I had more time, I probably could have found replacement brushes and fixed it. So if I could get cheap enough brushes, it might be worth doing. The end of the motor, the commutator, I think it's a commutator where the brushes ride, you could clean that up with some emery cloth or something, and it's not worn so bad that it couldn't work again. So just replace the brushes, it probably would work. At the time it was faster because I needed a grinder to just catch a ride into town and go buy a grinder for literally $15 or $20, you know. Not a big deal. I'm not going to bother tightening these down because I'll probably take it apart before I use it again. But I still like that idea because this would give me a real easy path to a 3-to-1 reduction. And we could have the wheel sitting out here. We could literally, at that point, we could take this part. This is actually a 5/8 bolt. Actually, I've got some of these bolts. I tested that. That was an idea. You could take a 5/8 nut, weld it to the wheel, spin it on there, put a little bit of Loctite. It would probably be fine. You know, it'd probably stay there. Or you could, you know, this little piece here locks against the flat that's here. You know, so you could build this into the wheel, slide it on, lock it to the detent, and then spin a nut on, and you'd be set, right? So we could make a, you know, for instance, that's backwards. That would be hilarious, actually, thinking about it. Oh, and then you get the lock on the side so you can lock it. This would be interesting. Like when you're taking the wheel off, you push the button in to lock it so then you can tighten it with a wrench, right? What if I had a servo or a solenoid that when I stopped the robot, I could engage that, and then the wheel would turn half a turn, and then find the lock, and that's your parking brake. And then let go, and it turns. You know, it's already there. So you're like, okay, we've got our Harbor Freight wheels. We could have Harbor Freight solar panels. We could take Harbor Freight batteries. In fact, we could take a Harbor Freight drill or any of their power tools and swap this onto the end of it. Just run a shaft down into here. So your motor's coming up, driving down, spinning, and then this is turning your wheel, and you could spin either way, right? So we could make a whole robot out of Harbor Freight parts. Huh. Might have to play with that at least a little bit. So this is a good little gearbox, really. And easy to come by. If I can make these motors work in DC, and that's possible, because there isn't any real difference between that and a DC motor. So they must have probably a rectifier in the body that takes the AC power and turns it into DC. Probably. Yeah, I'll put that on my list of things to test next time. This is exactly the thing I like doing, just screwing around in an afternoon, taking all my toys apart that are already broken and seeing which ones I could make work or which parts I could take from one pile and put it on a different thing. Yeah, this is exactly tinkering. This is what I like doing. So, I mentioned earlier the post-apocalyptic inventor. I'll put his website up. He's got a YouTube channel. I've been watching him for years, and he goes to a junkyard and brings back all the broken tools he can find, and he shows how they work, how you take them apart. Some things you can just clean up and fix. Some things he just goes online and he buys the replacement part for. You get like a $50 grinder, he'll get a really good one, and it's broken and thrown away. He'll find it, change the, a couple dollars worth of parts. Now he's got a really good high quality part or tool. Some of these are, tools made in the 70s, that still have 100 years of life left in them once you replace that one part, If I live closer to a place that, I could go find those things, he's going to places that he could buy the thing for the cost of the metal that was in it, basically. So somebody sold it as metal scrap, and he digs it out and buys it back for, you know, a dime on the dollar, you know, and puts it together. Plus he's making videos about doing it, so that's pretty cool. So if you're into that kind of thing, check him out. And I mentioned earlier, Drone Bot Workshop, Post-Apocalyptic Inventor. I'll think of some more later. I'm going to keep remembering these and putting them on the list. Just all the places that are cool to see, you know, guys doing that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's it for now. It's kind of cool to see that in action. Now that I've taken it apart and looked at it, the details are simple. Making one of these on your own, a little bit tricky because you need to keep the tolerance. This is one of the things. If I make this out of plastic, I got to get all of the tolerances close enough that the gears mesh without, you know, just destroying themselves. So it's a little bit of a challenge. If you had a lathe, you could make some parts, you know, or a mill. I'll tell you what, looking at this, it's going to be a lot easier just to take all the broken grinders and use them instead. Yeah, save all your brokens. You never know what you can use them for later. If I had 6 of these, I'd be set, you know. And I used to change these all the time in the post office. I fixed the postal trucks, the little mail trucks. But we would get in serious trouble if we were taking parts home. You know, even broken parts. They're like, I asked this question one time, and the answer was, if it's not broken, why are you changing it? You know, so in their eyes, you should throw it away because it's useless. And if it's not useless, you shouldn't be changing it in the first place, right? And, you know, I didn't want to belabor the point, because if I asked too many times, they'd be looking at my car every time I went home to see if I was taking stuff, you know. It'd be like the old song, one part at a time. The guy built a hot rod out of parts that he took home in his lunchbox kind of thing. You know, so it's like, well, here I am throwing away parts that, you know, the motor probably worked, but the gearbox didn't work, or the gearbox didn't work and the motor did work, or, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like, man, we're just throwing these things away. And the whole time I was doing it, I knew I could do something with it, but it hadn't occurred to me to run it on the robot until after the fact. I see somebody else doing it. I'm like, oh my God, there's all those motors I used to throw away. You know, it just kills you. Anyway, I think I've gone on long enough. We're getting one step closer to getting that beer cooler driving across the desert. So be sure to stay tuned and subscribe and like and all those good things. This channel on the Mars Clipper channel, I'm just getting it restarted. So the deal is, you got to have, I think, 1,000 subscribers. So definitely do subscribe. Let's get us up to 1,000 as quick as we can. But you have to have 1,000 subscribers before YouTube pays you any money. So I'm doing this essentially for free. But if you do want to give me a hand, kind of get things going, 2 options. You can go to my main channel and be a channel member there. I'll still get the money. It'll just come from the wrong channel. The other option, if you want to throw me $1 on PayPal, that makes a huge amount of difference. End of the month, that's the difference between buying parts or just buying food, honestly. And quite often, I'll take food money and buy parts. So I'm not living at large out here. My expenses are super low. It's just, you know, some things you got to go buy. I'll be doing some 3D printing stuff. I'll also be doing some CAD kind of stuff. I'm using a program called FreeCAD. Literally, it doesn't cost you any money. You can go get it for free. I'm not the expert in it, but I'll be doing some videos about what I'm doing and how I'm making some of these parts. So things like this, I designed in FreeCAD and then made on the 3D printer. And, you know, so that's, you know, if you want to learn how to do that kind of stuff, let me know in the comments, and I'll do that video sooner. I'm literally stuck in between right now. There's some of these things that work, some of these things that, you know, like I've got a pile of motors that work. I'm just trying to figure out what's the easiest or best way to take the power from the motor and get it down to the wheels, and do that 6 times. It's not rocket science, but it's like, well, which parts do I have that I can make work together? Now that I've saw, you know, this thing work, I'm like, man, I could take the littlest motor and have it driving through here, and that would be a good start. So that's a possibility. So some days like today, I just dig all my parts out and look at them and see which ones do what. But sometimes it's just a matter of it takes me a while to figure out which way to go with what I have. If I was just going out and buying parts, this would be a lot faster. But this is kind of fun too. It's amazing what you can make out of the stuff that's just been sitting here for years waiting to get put back to work. All right, that's enough for now. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next one. Okay, we're making some changes here. The motor driver I had before, where I had the switch and the potentiometer, was very good for what it could do, but it couldn't be programmed. So I couldn't run like a remote control on it or something like that. What we needed was the next step. So what I've got here is an Arduino Uno. This is actually a clone. I might take this a step up because I've got Raspberry Pi Picos that could probably do the same thing, but all of the sketches that I've been finding are 15 years old that are based on the Arduino, and this works totally fine, so I probably stay with it for now. Anyway, so we got a Arduino clone Uno. I think it's an R3. Not sure if that makes any difference or not. It's a programmable microcontroller. Okay, and then that is hooked to this other guy over here with the red light. It's a L298N motor driver. There's a better motor driver that I have, but this can do up to 2 amps, and the one I have can only do 1 amp. Immediately it loses 2 volts. So if I got, say 12 volts coming out of the battery, the motor only sees 10 at the best of times. Or the other one drops just a tiny fraction of a volt. I don't remember the exact specs. A lot of the stuff I'm learning as I go. I am not the expert on it, but I have some experience with some of these things from earlier projects. I had a bunch of projects I was doing back in Austin, and then I just kind of stopped doing it when I came out here because I just didn't have the power to do this kind of stuff. All right, so the wiper motor you recognize. This has got the chain sprocket that I 3D printed. That still doesn't work. I did a little testing with it again. Without reprinting it or a lot of grinding, it's not going to work. So I wrote a sketch. For right now, I'm separating it. So I've got one motor here, and then I've got the other motor over just off camera. I'll show you that in a minute. But what this will do, it'll start, slowly ramp up to speed, and then cruise at essentially full speed for about 5 seconds, and then it'll slowly slow down and stop and wait for a second, and then it'll do the same in reverse. Okay. The reason I spent all afternoon making this work, actually, if you remember the little RC buggy, when you push forward, it instantly was going forward. It was spinning, but it had no proportionate in between. Okay. So between the Arduino and the motor controller, we can use a PWM signal, which is pulse width modulation. And so we can control, instead of it just being on or off, it's more like a real throttle. So we can slowly bring it up, slowly bring it down. Okay. For the robot, I'm not going to do it like a remote control car. So what I want to be able to do is send it a command, like for instance, go forward 5 meters, that'd be about 15 feet, and then stop. And this will be perfect for that, because what it'll do on its own, when I say execute, I'll send it the command and then say go ahead, and then it'll just do it, and then when it gets to the end, it'll stop and wait for the next command. That gives me time to figure out what to do next. I'm not so much exactly simulating Mars here, but that's kind of, I think, how they sort of started the Mars Rovers. They would tell it to drive ahead a certain distance and then wait until the next day when they had time to look at the footage that it would send back. So it would get to where it's going and then stop and then take a bunch of pictures and then transmit them home, because the radio lag time was something like 30 minutes. So from the time you said go until the robot even got the message, it was half of that. So 15 minutes. And then it would drive itself off a cliff in the next 15 minutes before you saw what it was happening. So you would never know. So what I want to be able to do is say go forward 5 meters, and then it'll do it. And then when it gets there, I can say, okay, pivot 45 degrees to the right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a sequence of moves that if I just push a button, it'll send that sequence, and then the robot will just do it. And then, so I could have, a longer sentence if I wanted to. I could say, drive forward 10 meters, do that 3 times because we're on the driveway and we can see a long ways. And then when we get to the end, do an about face and then come back. So that could be a series of, right pivot 45 degrees, do that 4 times. That'll go 45, 90, 135, 180. Instead of me having to sit there and do every single command, I'll just say, okay, we'll have maybe a short list of 10 things. So I can have a button pad with 10 buttons, and I can just go this way. Okay. The motors tend to start up instantly. And if I don't have smooth throttle control, it's going to start breaking stuff. So by having it slowly speed up, and then also when it stops, instead of just slamming on the brakes, it would be nice if it just slowly stopped again. Okay, so that's what this is going to be able to do. Okay, that wasn't too bad. But you can kind of hear from the sound smoothly going up and down. And it's got good power for most of that range. When it comes to a complete stop, it doesn't have as much power, which would be good. If it's kind of up against something, it won't just try to pop over it right away. It'll slowly ramp up. Okay, so that's working. Okay, see, some lights flashing, and then over here, alright, I mean, it's not world peace or anything like that, but later on I'll get a screenshot of this. That took 72 lines of code, but it's a lot of repetition. As I get these things figured out, like this process, if this ends up working, I'm done. I don't have to redo this anymore. I can later on, I'll just basically, it's like a macro. You push a button and this will just happen. Okay. Now this is going to have to drive 6 wheels, but it's basically done. In fact, I can probably boil this down and make it into I think they call it a function here. So I could later on, I'd just say, okay, go forward and stop. Okay. This is set up that it gets up to speed and then it cruises for 5 seconds and then it slows down and stops, which is adjustable. Okay. So later on, I just go back and say, okay, go forward for, instead of 5 seconds, I could measure this out, measure the size of the wheel. If we look at, okay, here's our wheel. We can figure out with, is it pi r squared to go from the diameter to the circumference. So all you got to do is figure out the circumference, or I could just measure it with the tape, right? And, okay, so if we go forward 1 turn, that gives me 1 circumference. And that's close enough. I mean, yes, I know there's wheel slippage, but I'm not going to really worry about that right now. I don't need this to be perfectly exact. I just need it to be kind of close. Later on, we could kind of compare wheel speed to GPS speed and fine-tune it a little bit. Because if I've got a whole bunch of wheel speed and no GPS speed, either I just knock the antenna for the GPS off or I'm stuck. Okay, which would be a good time to stop and call for help. That's when the robot's sitting there on the side of the road and it's like, hey, come get me, I think we're stuck. Or it could send a little SOS. I could look at the camera and see what's going on. Probably the first year, the robot isn't going to be smart enough to figure that out. It'll take a while to get to that. Yeah, I don't know, this feels like good progress, really. I mean, this is something that I didn't really know how to do. And I found a couple of really, really smart people on the internet that had an example of how to do this. And that ended up not working for me. Maybe I made a mistake when I was looking at it, but I came up with a different way. It was like literally I got mad and was like, okay, this isn't working, go for a walk. And about 10 minutes away from the house. I think I had the idea. I'm like, okay, quick, run back and try it out before we forget. I didn't know if I was going to do this today or not, but I did have enough sun. Okay, this is, oops, I don't know if that's going to show up very well or not. This is a pulley, kind of like on your drill press, where you've got 3 different options, and here's the O-ring belts that I ordered. So I've got the smallest, the in-between, and the biggest, and this one is made to work on here. So I'm going to just take that off and then put this on. That hole should match. It's the same size of hole as what that one had. So I can just dock it on there. And then this one, same thing, only bigger. This one is made for the wheel. And again, I've got 3 sizes. So what I want to use that for is first round of testing. When I get a wheel on a platform and a motor, I can hook up with that, with the belt, and try it out. It's like, okay, is it way off? Is it way too fast? Is it way too slow? I can bump it up and down on the sprocket. And I've got a couple different ranges there. When I turn this thing, what I'm going to do, I don't want to be sitting there, going around corners gracefully. It's kind of like, well, I got to be able to think about it as if I wasn't there. So what I would rather do, and this is, this took me a while to figure out. I was looking at some other videos, and at first I disagreed, but then I started to think about it. If the robot is navigating, it's easier for the robot to drive forward, count the wheel turns, stop, and then do a pivot, and then it'll have a compass so it knows how far it pivoted. And we could say pivot until you're facing due east, 90 degrees. Okay. So if there's any slippage, it would still just keep turning until it got to 90, and then it would stop. Okay. But in the programming, what we could do is like, okay, if we're looking at our 6-wheel robot, I don't want to use straight skid steering because there's a lot of extra forces on, especially if you have more than 2 or 3 wheels. It's a lot of force to get it to pivot. But if we have it like the Mars Rover, the 2 front wheels, if we wanted to turn on place, we could turn them towards each other, and the back wheels would turn towards each other. And the center set of wheels, because you get 3 wheels, so front, middle, and back on both sides, they would stay put. Then all of the wheels on the right side could go forward, because you got like this is going this way, and this way, and this way. So they could go forward, and the ones on the opposite side would go backwards. So in that aspect, it is skid steering, but the wheels have also steered in the process. Okay, so all we do is say, okay, come to a stop. Always make sure you stop before you switch from steering to going forward or backwards. So you come to a stop, send the command to adjust all the wheels so that they're pointing where you want them. Once that's done, then rotate, and then stop, and then straighten the wheels, and then go forward again. Okay, so by doing it that way, it should have more accurate turns, and we can calibrate the turns. So we would just, in testing, we'd say, okay, how long did we have to rotate before we got a full turn? And we could do that by how many seconds or how many wheel turns or whatever. And we could do that about 100 times and measure it and come up with an average. But if it drives forward and stops and then turns and then drives forward and stops, that's more accurate than if it skid steers. Because what if one wheel is in the grass and one wheel is on gravel or concrete? They're not going to skid steer equally, and that's going to end up, it'll basically, if you look at from the top, it should pivot around the center point. But if it's not getting equal traction, it'll pivot off of one side. Now it's 2 feet off, which is maybe not the biggest problem, but it'll add up. So if you do a sequence of moves and it should have gotten to a certain place, it could be off by 20 feet. Because every turn is a little bit wrong. So I think this seems like it's going to be more accurate. So, yeah. Anyway. Making it work was a little bit of an issue, but once I understood what I was doing, I'm not the world's best programmer, but I've been doing it a little bit, and so it's when I read the instructions of what somebody else did, it starts to make sense. I can kind of grasp what they're talking about. What I did, just for anybody in case you're still watching, I've got a minimum speed and a maximum speed. 255 is the maximum. That's a common value for that kind of thing. That's the maximum that I can send via the PWM signal. Okay. Well, if you think this is going slow, it is. This is a gear motor. It's slowing down on purpose. It doesn't go very fast. It at best it'll do 100 140 RPM. So okay. 120 RPM would be 2 times around a second. Okay. Anyway. So what I came up with is like, okay, there's a minimum speed that this seems to work at, which I found that PWM of 70, I think, was what worked best at the slow end, or 100. I think I did 100. I'm just looking at which one doesn't look good, you know. So this one seemed to work well at 100. This one worked at 150 or something like that. So if you go less than 100, it just doesn't start. It doesn't have enough energy to even get going. Once it gets going, then it's fine. So to get a reliable start, we'll just start at 100 instead of starting at 0, because otherwise it'll sit there from 0 to 100 and not really do anything, and then it starts to go. Then you've got this long lag of 2 or 3 seconds before it even starts to go. Okay. So what I did is I just did a loop. So I said, for integer motor speed equals 100 it was the first part of it, and then motor speed is less than 255, and then we use another semicolon, and then motor speed equals, or motor speed plus plus. That just gives an increment of 1. So motor speed plus plus is the same as motor speed equals motor speed plus 1. Okay, it's kind of a shortcut for that. And then the opposite is minus minus. So you can do, so basically what this does is it does the thing, and then it goes back to the top and it adds 1, and it does the thing, and it goes back to the top and it adds 1, and it does the thing. So this is slowly going from 100, which is its starting speed, and getting up to 255. Okay, that's basically all we're doing. So every iteration, it gets 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105. So it's not really like a ramp would be a kind of a curve, but it's just kind of a linear. And I think it's going to look okay. I could play around with probably some algebra and plot a curve. So it'd start off really slow and then ramp up kind of quick. And then as it got to maximum speed, it would taper off and then hold maximum speed. If I need it, I think I can do it. I think all of the math functions are built into Arduino, so you could have it plot a curve. When I do things in animation, like in the Lightwave, which is a 3D animation program, not real stuff, but virtual stuff, you can do that. You can have it plot a nice smooth curve, and it just looks really supernatural. If I do any weight on the robot, I don't want it lurching, especially if it's got a camera on it or if it's pulling a load of rocks. I want it to smoothly accelerate so the rocks don't fall off. Last thing on this. The Arduino can't deliver enough power. It can do 5 volts and a very small fraction of an amp. The motors end up pulling a lot more. The wiper motor I was concerned with, it was pulling between 1 and 2 amps. So that's a fairly good amount. So what I'm doing, the motor controller, you can run external power into it. So you got little wires for digital signals and big wires for motor voltage and battery voltage. And the little driver board kind of keeps things straight. When we get a little bit closer, I'll figure out what I'm going to use for batteries. I like the idea of using the Harbor Freight tool batteries. So then I'll just have a down converter that'll take it from, say, 20 volts down to these motors run on 12 pretty nice. Knowing that the motor controller loses voltage, I could bump up my voltage to, say, 14 coming in, and then this would put out a nice even 12. You know, so you could bump it up a little bit. Although I don't really necessarily need to go very fast, but what I could do is if I see that when I start pulling a load, yeah, then maybe I could run 14 or 16 into here, and the motor would be just happy as can be running at 15. You can overvolt the motor to a point and it'll be fine. So, and you don't run full power for long stretches either. Typical day, go to town. On the way back, I see something on the side of the road. Now this has been here. I've been back for 2 months. I think this has been on the side of the road for 2 months. I kept looking at it. I never stopped. I just would see it, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's a little, it's a little pushing carpet sweeps. Well, I don't have any carpet, and I do have a shop vac, so I didn't really think it was very interesting. But finally today, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stop and see what it is, get it out of my head, right? Well, I start looking at it. It's got a battery pack. It's motorized. Okay, so these are nickel metal hydride. What used to be the good battery. This was after NiCads and before lithium became popular. Each cell is 1.2 volts, so the 6 of them together, they labeled it 7.2. That's probably about right. These are probably decent nickel metal hydride batteries. Okay, they're spot welded together, made a nice little pack. All right, it had a switch, it had some wires. All right. So the rest of it I already threw away, but I was like, so it's got what it's got. It's got a gearbox in each corner and a motor here that drives out through the gear. All right, and this is probably similar to the size of motor that I already have for the robot, the littlest one. So I'm looking at this. I'm like, oh, this is actually interesting now. I got all excited and stuff. So, it works. Most likely what happens when something like this, the batteries go bad, or they lose the charger or whatever, right? And the nickel metal hydrides, actually these, I would bet these are probably still good batteries. They, but they don't have super long life as far as each time you charge it, you would probably, and what happens, they would probably forget to charge it. And then the next time it doesn't work and they got mad and threw it away. Right? Yeah. Anyway, so the pack was made for 7.2. I'm running one of my 18650s that I just grabbed at random. I don't think it's even full voltage. But check this out. See if it works again. So I just got a battery. It's got part of a tab on it that was spot welded when I had a working spot welder. So if I just touch the contact on here. Right? Not a huge amount of torque, but pretty good. And I don't think it's got full power. In fact, let's see what would happen if we give it lots of power. Let's see. Probably just off camera, I got a multimeter here. Okay, this one's got 4 volts. Let's try it. I think the first one didn't have 4 volts. Now, granted, it's supposed to run at 7, but I found that a single lithium battery will outperform a whole pile of nickel metal hydrides. So, yeah. That's not anywhere near how much power it's supposed to have, but that looks like it actually would work. Okay, yeah. Now, if we give it both batteries, that's probably close to what it should have. Oh, wait, yeah, that would probably be right. Right? That's actually fun. Yeah. So it's like, well, I'm going to keep it like this until I decide what to do with it. But it just strikes me as funny that what if I did make a little duster for the robot and just turned it loose in the desert? That'd just be a funny thing to do. But yeah, most of the plastic parts are broken. This part is cracked, so it probably got stepped on or something. I don't really need it for that. It must have had something underneath that when it swept, it would catch it in a little tray, because this has got latches on it that you could take it apart pretty easily. So there's a part missing here. But for the parts that are here, And that little motor just flies. At first I hooked it up to the dead battery, and I'm like, oh, that's not very good. You know, oh, let's see if there's anything in this pack. Okay, so that would be, that's the plus, that's the minus. Yeah, okay, so we'll just touch it onto here, touch it onto here. This is the pack it came with. Yeah, it's not working, so let's see how much power it's actually got. Yeah, the pack is basically dead, so you know, it gets left for too long and it doesn't work anymore. But I'll bet I could save these cells. If I hooked them up to the charger, I've got chargers that'll still read nickel metal hydrides. Would probably work fine. Yeah. And I found a screwdriver today. I already put it away, but it's like, yeah, you're riding along, you see all the stuff, and it's like I ride right past the main county dump, so everybody hauls their trash to this dump. So stuff randomly falls off their trucks every day practically, and people just don't stop and pick up their stuff, which is kind of annoying. I grew up in a place in Canada that we actually take care of our country, and it's kind of sad when I see other people just not doing that, but whatever. America, what are you going to do? More for me. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching my video to the end. It really does make a difference. If you would like to help build the robot army, please be sure to like and subscribe to the videos. Also, Patreon and PayPal support is greatly appreciated. Information is down in the video description below. Okay, thanks again, and goodbye for now.